What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Hey, what's up, Fantasy Points? This is Outside the Box, Week 8. Every single week, I talk DFS strategy for large field tournaments with Scott Barrett, CEO of Fantasy Points and master of Dank Stats. We're going to be poking holes in the chalk. We're talking about chalk we might like at each position. We'll be going quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends. We'll build some lineups at the end, and after we talk through the chalk, we're also going to find plays that we like who are lower owned at every position. Scott, I watched a little bit of Cashing Points last night. Have not watched the whole thing yet, but you were a guest on Cashing Points. Part of what I saw was you saying, I might just lock in Lamar Jackson into every single lineup. Now Lamar Jackson is out. The whole slate becomes a lot more complicated. Have you figured out what you want to do now with Lamar Jackson out?
Oh yeah, dude, it stinks. This week sucks. This is like total amateur hour week 18 BS. This is probably the worst slate breakdown I've ever written because it wasn't just Lamar Jackson. It's also Michael Penix, Tyrod Taylor. So a bunch of news that kind of just flipped the slate on its head. But lucky for you guys, you are listening to, we have this advantage as a Saturday show. There are a lot of Friday shows in this space, but you're going to get up to the minute updates and hopefully have a better sense of the slate now that we have this more valuable up-to-date information.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like part of the reason we do this show on Saturdays.
That is absolutely right.
I mean, me too. It sucks. It sucks not having Lamar.
I built like this lineup last night that I just thought was like, so I'm like, I'm done. I'm going to be a one lineup guy this week. It was Lamar, Zay, Rome, and then just like everything else fit perfectly. And yeah, so it does suck.
Kills us. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty brutal. I was pretty excited about Lamar, and also like he wasn't getting a ton of ownership. Like, he was being projected for 13-14% at 6,800. Just like people kind of forgot who Lamar is, I guess. So that's kind of a bummer. But like you said, we do the show on Saturday in part because we have the most up-to-date information, or at least more up-to-date than earlier in the week. It's kind of a balance between like you want as much information as possible and also to have some shelf life. So we don't do this on Sunday mornings. You save that for your behind the paywall show with Johnny Proctor. But we have, at this point, we have most of the information that we are going to have. There are still some things up in the air. Tyler Rozier is questionable. I'm sure there are a lot of things out there, but we have a lot of the information now. So hopefully this show is more valuable because we have that information. By the way, if you haven't already done so, please like this video. And of course, if you're not already subscribed to Fantasy Points YouTube, you should be subscribed to Fantasy Points YouTube. They put out fantastic content every single day here on the channel. Even in the offseason, they're putting out best ball content, dynasty content, season long. All of that is available at Fantasy Points on this YouTube channel. Free to join the YouTube channel. If you want to pay a little bit of money and get even better access, you can use promo code OTB15 to get 15% off any Fantasy Points product. Get access to the Discord to get that Sunday show with Scott and John Proctor, and of course all the content behind the paywall, which is really in-depth research done by a lot of great analysts here. So check that out. Oh, and as Tom notes, it's 15% and already discounted 50% off at Fantasy Points. Scott, is that every product? Is everything 50% off for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think just about everything. Maybe the optimizer's not. I did want to just get a quick plug in, and then I probably won't plug anything for the rest of the show, but Justin Varnes is our IDP expert, and defensive props are so soft. And also Varnes is just like the GOAT. So he's hitting 69% of his defensive prop bets. He's up 94 units over the last 3 years. And so, yeah, you can upgrade to premium or purchase a premium subscription. That's 50% off. Use the OTB promo code, get an extra 15% off after that. And dude, you're going to make the cost of the subscription, which is like, I don't know, $40, back in like a second. And then you're just going to keep profiting for the rest of the year. So yeah, upgrade to premium gives you access to everything DFS and betting, includes Justin Varnes' article or prop finder tool, the appropriate channels in Discord, Ryan Heath's advanced matchups, my slate breakdown article. So check that out.
Yeah, definitely check that out if you haven't already done so. I mean, that's a fantastic deal, getting 15% off already discounted prices everywhere. Scott, we're going to get into quarterbacks here. I do have to address this question because I've had the same question. You've been wearing this hat a lot lately. True North Fantasy asks, is that a Winnipeg Blue Bombers hat? And then Brad Moore asks, he says it's actually a Wandale Robinson hat. Can you correct the record? What is this hat?
Yeah, everyone guesses something wrong, and it's also my guess was it was like a Wrigley hat because my wife is from Chicago, and she just gave it to me. And no, it's just like some brand that she really likes. So yeah, I have a bunch of other hats. I have like 50 Mets hats, and she just hides them all. And my flannelverse hat, and she hides them all. And so now I only have these W hats that I don't even know.
It's very sad. Very sad that she hid your flannelverse hat. I saw Jake wearing it last night. That was awesome. Cool to see.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to get in on quarterbacks. There are only 2 remaining in double digits in terms of ownership. Bo Nix against the Cowboys just projected for 13% ownership at 6,000. And then Jalen Hurts now with no AJ Brown, more condensed target tree. He's 6,600 against the Giants, also projected for 13% ownership. So starting with those 2, do you like them at these ownership numbers? Are you fading? How do you feel about Nix and Hurts?
Dude, I was so excited to go all in on Jalen Hurts. I wanted to say something. So I keep saying is like, no, I fade the chalkiest quarterback of the week. And I really have been doing that. It's like, I've had one lineup with the chalkiest quarterback of the slate each of the last 3 weeks. But it's like 5% of my total bankroll. But that's been my highest scoring lineup of the week each of the last 3 weeks. And it's not like the quarterback's done anything. They haven't hit a ceiling game at all. It's just they've like hit value, and we're like a top 5 fantasy point per dollar quarterback of the slate. But because it's just been but each week that's been my highest scoring lineup, just maybe like luckily or randomly, whatever. So maybe I'm not going to full fade these chalky quarterbacks. It really kind of comes down to how good everyone else fits. Like last week, I hit the nuts everywhere but quarterback. We're just like flames everywhere. And then I had a ton of Caleb scoring 5 fantasy points, a ton of Justin Fields scoring 4 fantasy points, which, really dampered what could have been a killer week if I just decided to eat the chalk and not really lean so heavily into upside. But yeah, so looking at Bo Nix within that context, obviously this makes sense in a best possible matchup against Dallas. One could argue like, oh, maybe they're finding their bearings. The defense can't be as bad as it was the first month of the season. They've had some progress. They went from like a 1% man rate to a 50% man rate last week. I don't know. I still think this is like one of the worst defenses we've seen in like nearly a decade. Even if it is man, Bo Nix is so much better against man than zone. He has sucked for most of the year, but he also just scored 36 fantasy points in the fourth quarter of last week's game, which might be the most ever. At the very least, it's the most by any quarterback in any quarter in fantasy points data history. And like an important note here, also the Cowboys are down Trevon Diggs, safety Donovan Wilson. That's big. He's one of the most home road sensitive quarterbacks. He's also one of the most matchup sensitive quarterbacks. I was pulling the stat to rip on Caleb Williams, where if you just take out, bottom 2 matchups, his touchdown to interception ratio drops to like 12 versus 6. But it's actually like Bo Nix was right there with him, where he really beats up on these bad teams. That's also a Sean Payton thing. He's not afraid to keep his foot on the gas and really run up the score against a bad team. And so, yeah, I certainly get this. Bo Nix as the top value, even if like he's largely struggled this year and hasn't looked great.
And this is a home game for Denver, so this should be a better spot for him in Denver. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I've been planning on playing a lot of Bo Nix. Like to me, this is like he's the chalkiest, but 13% doesn't seem that chalky given his price tag. I don't know. The matchup is obviously ideal. The quarterback not ideal, but shows what he can do last week. Jalen Hurts a little bit tougher, but do you like him better or worse with AJ Brown out?
I probably like him better. My argument when I thought I could play Lamar was just going to be like, hey, his best player is out, and like they were good last week, but like this offense has sucked throughout the rest of the year. So like that's your argument against him. Um, but I mean, yeah, no AJ Brown really condenses things. You see Devonta Smith popping as maybe the top wide receiver value on the slate. Dallas Goddard looking like a top 2 tight end value. Giants are down Paulson Adebo, Javon Holland. Um, so it kind of looks like a pretty good matchup through the air to me. And Saquon Barkley averaging 3.3 yards per carry. Maybe this is just, they figured out their offensive identity this year. It needs to be through the air. And so, yeah, I can't hate on this too much on a really short slate with a bunch of backup quarterbacks in, no Lamar Jackson. I think this is fine. And yeah, probably no AJ Brown makes me like it even more.
I feel like I usually on these shows kind of have an idea of who I want to talk about. And that's not the case at all. This week at quarterback, I'm like, everything has been like you said, completely flipped on its head. I don't even know who I like at this point. It's just like such a messy slate as far as quarterbacks go. I'm not totally in love with any of them, I don't think, at this point with Lamar out. He was kind of the one that I really, really loved here. I guess Bo Nix also.
Because you're sharp. You just know. That was
it was so easy.
play.
Yeah. That was the play. I guess Baker Mayfield is 6,400. Like we usually like Baker Mayfield. Usually though, he's like 4% owned. Now he's 9%. Do we still like him at 9% ownership?
Yeah, dude, he's just the man. He finds a way. He balls out. He's so much fun to have money on, and
True.
like it doesn't matter who's out, who's hurt. He just finds a way, balls out. He did this last year. Like he posted tournament winning scores when Kate Otten was his wide receiver one. Amika Buka, full week of practice, no setbacks, should be more healthy than he's been the last 2 weeks. Tez Johnson may be ascending, and he does still have Kate Otten. And so, yeah, this is Rashad White popping as a top value. So there is clear upside to this stack. Really like Igbuka, and then Otten and Tez is more fringe pieces. It's a really good matchup. Saints are bottom 5 in fantasy points per dropback allowed. And Olave and Shaheed are popping his values on the bring back. So, yeah, I like Baker quite a bit.
Joe Flacco 5,400. Is that too expensive with Sauce Gardner out? I mean that helps a bit.
No,
When-
I
when
mean
you go to Flacco.
this Jets defense has been awful with him. They're a bottom 5 defense by EPA per drop back, and then you lose like the one player who's done well, who has shut down number ones, and you've seen the number 2s pop. You can question whether or not the Jets can really push the Bengals here, but Flacco is over 90 pass attempts the last 2 weeks, and like if game script was different, would that have really changed? Just like this offensive line is so bad in the running game. Chase Brown averaging negative yards before contact per attempt. So like, maybe this is just who they are. And if they, want to make a serious push into the playoffs, they just have to just abandon the run. And like he's going to have, 38 plus pass attempts every week regardless. And so, yeah, that's the argument for it. I think there are better plays than Flacco just because like I would rather just play Fields or play Chase solo rather than try and force the double. But I get it.
I want to pick your brain on these back the new quarterbacks that we did not have yesterday. So they have not been talked about much. We now have Kirk Cousins at 4,400 in a dream matchup with Miami. We have Justin Fields at 5,000 in a dream matchup with Cincinnati. And then we have Tyler Huntley at 4,300 in pretty strong matchup with the Bears as well. So we have 3 like cheap quarterbacks that we have not had throughout the week. I'm guessing a lot of people are kind of wondering, what are we going to do with these backups? And honestly, I think they look okay. They look like pretty strong plays to me. Do you like any of the 3 of them, and how would you rank them?
Yeah, I like them a lot. We can start with Kirk Cousins. First of all, the matchup's amazing. Miami is giving up the second most fantasy points per drop back to quarterbacks, the most EPA per dropback allowed. They're very easy to run on, but the R, and so you'll see that here where maybe they don't pop as highly by schedule adjusted,
Yep.
but on a per drop back basis. And so obviously like this is the Bijan spot. And like that's the question is like I think Kirk Cousins is an upgrade on Penix. Like I've been very critical of him, the limitations of this offense, Zach Robinson's play calling, which I think is a Penix thing. I was just tweeting back and forth with Matt Harmon about an hour ago where he was being very critical of Penix holding back London. And so I think, Cousins, another year removed from that offseason surgery, I don't think he's going to be like the sloth statue he was last year. And like the accuracy was top 5, whereas Penix has been bottom 5 this year. So I do see this as an upgrade and like a very winnable matchup. The question is, do they unleash it, or like, do they like, it's always like, what are the incentives for the GM and the head coach? Like, are they down to like roll with Cousins if he's on fire? Or is it like, hey, we don't want our, highly drafted rookie to lose confidence. We got a lot of heat for making that draft pick after signing. So it's like, do they hide Cousins and then Bijan just goes freaking insane? Or do they kind of just like let Cousins sling it and see if he can like, keep Penix on the bench and like go deep in it? And so I just don't know the answer there, but I do see like a clear path. And that's an easy stack with Bijan and well, I was gonna say Drake London, but Mooney for sure gets a boost with Cousins because that was the stat I kept tweeting out this offseason was by yards per game, there was only like 0.8 separated Mooney from London in games with Cousins. But yeah, so that's just something to keep in mind. But like in reality, and we'll get to it, is like this is the most obvious Bijan spot of all time.
Yeah, it is. I also, and we'll talk about this with Bijan too, but Tyler Algier is questionable for this game. Starting with Cousins, does that impact your interest in Cousins at all? Because maybe it's a little bit more difficult for them to just run the entire game if it is Bijan, and then I don't remember who their third string running back is, but he's gotten like no work. Nathan Carter or something has gotten like no work so far this year. So you'd think that maybe they'd be more inclined to throw it more if it's no Tyler Algier as the RB2. Do you think that impacts your interest in Cousins at all?
I don't think so. Not unless Bijan like picked up something in game. And it also I think Algier is going to play.
Okay. Cousins looks great here. I do like the idea of like maybe they are like maybe they want to test Cousins at this point. Like, okay, our defense appears to be elite, and Michael Penix is kind of holding us back. Maybe like they're looking for an excuse to go back to Cousins if he does look good. So they might want to showcase him a little bit. Outside of Cousins, I mean, Fields has the ideal matchup with Cincinnati. He's obviously been pretty bad, but like Fields can pop for some big fantasy games. This seems like a spot where he could pop for a big game. How much interest do you have in Justin Fields?
Yeah, so it's not a lock with Garrett Wilson out, but I also kind of think they just like spam design runs. And when this Jets offense has been its most successful, and Fields has been his most successful from a real NFL standpoint and a fantasy standpoint, is like they just spam design runs. Like that's what you should do when you have Justin Fields. And so obviously like he's a bit of a roller coaster ride from a fantasy perspective. Like I said, he killed a number of my lineups that were live last week. But you look at his matchups against bottom 5 defenses. So if you go back to schedule adjusted, you'll see for quarterbacks, the Bengals right there. All right, if you do all instead of last 5, just because I don't know if the numbers change, but you see the Bengals are a top 5 matchup for quarterbacks. So were the Steelers, so were the Dolphins, and so were the Cowboys. He had 30 fantasy points against the Steelers, 28 against the Dolphins, and 26 against the Cowboys. So he's crushed these top 5 spots. And so he gets another one this week. I really like him as a lean into variance play. Like I said, no Garrett Wilson makes things tricky. No Josh Reynolds makes things tricky. But if you go back over to schedule adjusted, you'll see Mason Taylor has a matchup that couldn't be any better. they just gave up 140 plus yards and 4 touchdowns to tight ends last week. So he's banged up too, but that's a fun little stack on. I like.
As long as we have one pass catcher healthy for the Jets, we can consider playing. All right, do you think you'll play Justin Fields naked?
No, like I said, I like Mason Taylor unless he's out.
Yeah.
Then I don't know. I got to look at projections, see where Alan Lazard comes in at or whatever the heck. But
okay.
I really like Mason Taylor this week. So, and it's tight end week, so it's a great week to have a tight end in the flex spot.
And then finally, Tyler Huntley, 4,300. I mean, we loved Lamar. Tyler Huntley is not Lamar. He threw for 166 yards per game last year on the Dolphins in 5 starts, rushed for 27 yards per game. But, he does run a little bit still the same matchup that the Lamar had. Any interest in $4,300 Tyler Huntley?
I don't like him as much as our projections do. Our projections really like him. But yeah, we've seen spike weeks from him in the past. It's a really good matchup. This is Bears giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per dropback to quarterbacks. And they're down their top 3 cornerbacks. He's mostly like not hit value, but he has had some spike weeks. Another note on him is like he is obsessed with tight ends. He like locks on to tight ends, so maybe it's a good spot for Mark Andrews. But personally, I kind of like the other guys I mentioned more. But it seems Chris disagrees with that. So and Chris's projections have been on fire this year.
All right, couple other spots that I am interested in hearing your thoughts on. Number one is Dak Prescott against Denver. Tough defense, but like they've hung 40 points on the Packers, which was a really tough defense. Dak Prescott, 6,500. We've talked about this being this year's Bengals. Are we just going back to Dak Prescott when he's going to be fairly contrarian again this week?
Yeah, Denver's defense actually might be overrated. Like they were like so lights out for the first, 14 weeks of last season. Since then, I don't know. What does schedule adjusted say? Am I wrong?
This is over the past 5 weeks. Oh, they're 4th worst for quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks. So
yeah, I mean Jackson Dart tagged them. But by passing, I mean if you look at passing, it's closer to neutral. But yeah, so it's just like this is the narrative we've been running with is that the Cowboys are this year's Joe Burrow and the Bengals, and so yeah, obviously it makes sense to play Bo Nix against this awful Cowboys defense. But it's like, just like it made sense to play quarterbacks against the Bengals awful defense last year. But it's also, there were so many games where, oh no, actually Joe Burrow was the one you wanted. And so he's drawing 2% projected ownership versus Nix being the chalkiest quarterback of the slate. And then if you want to stick with that analogy, what happened when Burrow played the Broncos last year? Him and T. Higgins combined for 85 DraftKings fantasy points. Jamar Chase also had like 10 catches and hit the 100-yard bonus in that game. So, it's just like on a slate that's kind of starved for value. It's tough to pay up and go with a double, but I think there's certainly more upside there than the field suggests.
Yeah. Caleb against Baltimore. The Baltimore defense is healthier this week than it has been. What are your expectations for this defense with a lot of their players back this week? Do you think Caleb can put up a big game here against Baltimore?
Yeah, I think he can. And like I was saying before about Bo Nix, him and Caleb Williams, really their best games have been like perfectly correlated with their best matchups. And this is even though they're healthier, a favorable matchup. It's not as like insane as it was when he played the Texans, but it's still pretty great. Ultimately didn't make my pool just because I don't know, he burned me last week and I'm such a Caleb hater and I always have been. His accuracy is just so awful. So I crossed him off my list this week.
Okay. Yeah, I'm running out of names that I have serious interest in. Do you have anybody that we have not talked about that you really want to talk about?
Yeah, I have a lot of guys actually.
Okay.
Jackson Dart. The everything report every single week is like, I'll talk mostly from a redraft perspective, but looking back at the week that was, and I wrote this massive love tome to Arande Gadsden, and then I didn't have any DFS exposure last week, but Theo did, and Theo finished top 10 in everything, top 10 in the red zone. And then this week I led off with a love tome to Jackson Dart, and I'm not going to make the same mistake again. I am going to have Jackson Dart exposure. You look at the numbers, he ranks 3rd in fantasy points per dropback. He ranks 4th in fantasy points per start. He's just absolutely crushing it. Really fun. Baker Mayfield vibes. So he's a player I want exposure to. I do worry about this little ankle injury he picked up in last week's game, and he didn't run as much, but he did practice all week and is no longer in the injury report. So he deserved a shout out. Spencer Rattler deserves a shout out. He's going to pop in all the sims because Chris Olave looks like a top 3 wide receiver value. Rashid Shaheed, a top 5 wide receiver value. He's also, I mean, he hasn't done much for fantasy, but I think he's underrated in terms of performance. I was talking about those accuracy numbers. He's weirdly like top 7 in everything. And so like the stack works. So he's another cheap guy. We'll talk about how exciting the top 3 highest priced running backs are. Jamar Chase is. And so he's a way to fit that. And then I have a few more quarterbacks too.
Is Josh Allen one of them?
No, but Jake and Ryan really like Josh Allen. I just, I only play him in spots where I think they'll need him to be Superman, and I just don't see this as a Superman spot. Right. And that's really worked out well for me. It's very rarely burned by that, and it's paid off when we're right on that. The other quarterback I have is Drake May, who's like an amazing value on FanDuel, but still under-owned on DraftKings. He's a top 5 fantasy quarterback. He's playing at an MVP level, so it's kind of weird to see him draw such low ownership. It's a perfect schematic matchup. He leads all quarterbacks in fantasy points per dropback against man coverage, which we'll see at a top 6 rate. And then I think part of the reason he's going low owned is people can't figure out who the key stacking partner is, and I feel pretty good at Stephon Diggs, and like even if maybe that's a little bit of hubris, it's still like clearly the one to lean into just based on upside.
Steven asked a question, and I think that is a good question because there are so many viable quarterback options on this slate. So many who are, pretty widespread. So it was going to be Lamar Jackson as your clear, like this is the quarterback I'm going to play. So you haven't had a ton of time to think about this question today. So I don't know if you have an answer yet, but Steven asked, Scott, if you only played one quarterback, who would it be?
Yeah, so I really hate like wishy-washy answers and cop-outs, and like I've kind of on this show given conviction, this is what I'm going to do, or I was going to do that with Lamar. This isn't a cop-out. I really think it just depends on the lineup, and like it's just quarterback isn't the priority this week because there isn't really anyone who stands out relative to price and ownership. So it's just who fits, or just the best lineup in the stack. But me, I'm pretty risk tolerant. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Justin Fields, even though that could just totally wreck me like it did last week.
That's the answer that I was thinking about giving. I was like, this is one that I know is going to piss off YouTube chat because everybody's responding like, why would you ever play Justin Fields? Why would you ever play anybody who's relying on Justin Fields throwing them the ball? And you and I like that variance of like, yeah, he sucks most of the time, and then he'll pop off for 30 fantasy points, and sometimes he'll bring somebody along with him. So again, Cincinnati, who just like teams crush week after week. I think Justin Fields at 3,000 seems a little bit too cheap for the matchup. So I think that probably would be my answer, with the understanding that, he might get you 5 fantasy points. We might look really stupid playing Justin Fields. I'm okay looking stupid when I'm trying to win tournaments. So I think that is probably my answer also.
I was going to come here and say my 10 max quarterbacks would be 9 Lamar Jackson and then one Derrick Henry lineup.
Nice. Yeah. Which would have made a lot of sense. Yeah. It's just such a bummer.
He's on the showdown slate next week, which sucks too. So can't even
That does suck.
Well, for me, I don't play showdown.
I do play.
You'll play him.
Yeah, I will. Chad says Fields isn't playing this. Yes, he is. Fields is in fact playing this week. One other quarterback. I mean, I guess we haven't talked about Andy Dalton. I guess we talked about every other like backup quarterback who's come in. Andy Dalton's been available all week, and I haven't really given much thought to playing a $4,500 Andy Dalton. Do you have any interest there?
Probably not.
Okay. The other one is Daniel Jones. I mean, he's been pretty good fantasy asset so far this year. Nice matchup with Tennessee, but they probably can't push. So I don't know. Do you have any interest in Daniel Jones?
No. I mean, it's just the Jonathan Taylor show there. I just don't trust it. But yeah, maybe his leverage. But yeah, I just think there's better quarterback plays.
All right. Anything else at quarterback?
I don't think so.
All right. We've talked about a lot of quarterbacks. It's a weird slate for quarterbacks. Running backs, as you already alluded to, much simpler than quarterbacks in that we have a big top three in Bijan Robinson, and this is not in the order, but Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, the spend ups kind of separate in terms of projection. I guess I can sort by projection if you want to see that. How much, I guess, let's start with those three. Do you have a preference between Bijan, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey? Bijan projecting for 30% ownership at 8,800 against Miami. Jonathan Taylor is 9,500 projected for 22% ownership. Christian McCaffrey, 9,000 projected for just 17% ownership against Houston. Do you have a preference between those three? You just jamming all three of them? What are you doing with the big three?
I will say it is a big three. Not everyone has it that way, but I do have Christian McCaffrey in there. I agree that Bijan feels like the best play. It's just like the nuts matchup. Miami giving up the most rushing yards to running backs, the fifth most receiving yards to running backs. And so Bijan's someone who could beat you both ways. And, you know, it makes sense to maybe lean on him more without your quarterback. And so, yeah, I agree with that. But I mean, they're all great plays. Like one of my favorite stats on Jonathan Taylor is he has 3 games with 3 or more rushing touchdowns this year. That's Daniel Jones has exactly 3 games with 3 or more passing touchdowns in his entire career. And so he's just really the focal point, and it's a best possible matchup with ideal game script. And then, you know, their best run stoppers out this week. So it's like, you didn't think it could get any better. And it's like, oh no, it did. And then Christian McCaffrey, yeah, best usage and volume in fantasy points data history. He's a top 6 wide receiver just based on receiving fantasy points per game, but he also leads all running backs in carries per game. And with Kittle back, you saw it last week. That's a massive efficiency boost. So really just to say they're all great. And, you know, I try and have conviction and give you clear, but it's just like, yeah, they're all good. And I don't really have, you know, nothing maybe, to really, yeah, go ahead.
When we build a lineup at the end of the show, let's try to build one with all 3 just to see if we can.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Kind of fun to try it out. People say it's possible. Let's test it. But those are not actually the 3 who are getting the most ownership. Derrick Henry, 34%. I assume this came up quite a bit with Lamar Jackson being out and kind of a boost in expected workload for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, so that doesn't make sense to me. I kind of disagree with that. I think Henry becomes a much worse play without Lamar Jackson, just because he's the most game script sensitive player in fantasy history. And I know, you know, last week was a blowout loss, and his last game, and he still got there. And it is a great matchup. Chicago bottom 3 in yards per carry allowed, bottom 5 in schedule adjusted. But I mean, you're talking about a player who's 34% owned. That's a pretty easy fade. And then you have DeAndre Swift as clear leverage. I like that. And I wonder how much like this ownership is just driven by the fact that he's the cheapest he's been since 2018 or whatever. And that tweet went viral 12 different times from like 15 different people. That's something Jake is really good at. Like, and we have that in the slate breakdown every week, but like, this is the cheapest George Kittle has been since 2019. This is the cheapest, you know, this happens every week. And so I'll probably fade Derrick Henry and feel fine about it.
I will say this is the highest ownership that I've seen on Derrick Henry, 34%. I think
I just talked to Darren. He just updated ownership, so I know it's reflecting.
Let me. I'll refresh just in case it's changed. But I would assume that this is reflecting the news with Lamar being out. So that's probably why he's getting. Yeah, this is, so that is the latest. Interesting. So we're at this point, it's looking like we're going to have chalk Derrick Henry week, which I would have liked him at 12% ownership. 34 gets a little bit tough there. What about Rachaad White, the other kind of chalky mid-range option here, 6,400, 23% projected ownership. We saw him have a dud game last time out, so we know he can do it even with Bucky Irving out. How much interest do you have in Rachaad White?
Yeah, I do like Rachaad. This is a really good, really valuable workload. 83% snap share, 16 XFP per game. We've seen him produce in this role before. I think what happened is he had a really tough stretch of schedule, facing the 3rd, 5th, 13th toughest matchups by schedule adjusted. This week's matchup, top 7. I like his pass catching upside with all the receivers hurt. So I think he's good chalk.
Yep. White looks good. And then what about Saquon against the Giants? No AJ Brown. This has been a pretty good matchup in general for running backs, but Saquon couldn't get it done last time. How much interest, if any, do you have in Saquon here?
Yeah, I thought about him as leverage, but I'm just not going to play the guy who's sucked this year. 3.3 yards per carry, 0 games over 18 DraftKings fantasy points. Like, I'll just wait for him to go off before I play him into ownership.
Yeah. Every week you play running backs against Cincinnati. It's worked out, I think, every week except for maybe one so far this year. Some weeks you can play multiple running backs against Cincinnati. Now you get Breece Hall, who I think is a pretty talented running back, but he is, offense led by Justin Fields. How much interest do you have in a $6,100 Breece Hall projected for 16% ownership?
Yeah, I don't know. He's okay. He's banged up. He's questionable. He hasn't really done anything this year. His last full game, he had 22 carries. He also had 0 targets. He is who he always is. He's like a boomer bust play who could rip off a long run, but I tend not to play him in spots like this when he's fairly chalky.
I think I'm taking the opposite approach with Breece Hall, just because this seems like low ownership to me. For given his price tag in the matchup, I'm like 16%. Like feels like he should be 30 to me. So, but I get like there are definitely some worries there. But then the other question is, if Breece Hall ends up sitting, Isaiah Davis 4,100 would presumably, I mean, that'd be a smash, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Devin Achane kind of pops in terms of like fantasy points per dollar at 7,300. Tough matchup with Atlanta. They've been really good, but 20.9 projection is pretty good for a $7,300 running back at 15% ownership. How much interest in Devin Achane?
Yeah, there's a chance he's just Miami's Christian McCaffrey, ranked second among all running backs in target share, tied for the team high. So he's getting that sort of running back masquerading as a wide receiver usage through the air, and then on the ground he's kind of like back to who he was as a rookie. He's hit 5 yards per carry in 4 of his last 5 games. Just went crazy against a really tough Browns defense. And so like, I know Vegas is kind of treating Miami as dead, and I kind of agree with that. Limited touchdown upside. But if he's their CMC and he maintains this rushing efficiency with that pass catching workload, he can for sure get there, even though this doesn't look like a great matchup.
I don't think I can read the Javonte Williams quote on air because it's too explicit. Did you see? I was like, this has to be a fake. This has to be a fake tweet, right? That can't be a real quote. He's gonna pound him with his girth. I mean, come on. But what do you think of Javonte Williams in a revenge game here?
Yeah, I like it. No one's really talking about him, and he's just like obviously good leverage, especially stacked with Dallas's defense, which is super cheap and not drawing any ownership. Like I said, Bo Nix has kind of sucked this year, and Dallas's defense, I mean, they're really so bad, but maybe they're better. Maybe this scheme switch up is beneficial for them. But yeah, he looks like a value anyway. He's cheap relative to his workload, cheap relative to the production we've seen from him. And like this is a better matchup than you think. Like people see Denver and it's like, oh, can't play running backs against Denver. But if you look at schedule adjusted, they're giving up the seventh most. Yeah, seventh most. Scroll
It's
down.
maybe I sort by all.
Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go, seventh most. Look at that.
Yeah.
So
Kind of a run
so I
funnel.
like Javante.
Yeah, Javante looks pretty good here. Straight Cash Homie says, "Pause. Is he talking about football?" Or I mean, this is not my quote. This is Javante Williams' quote. After Javante, what about the other side of that one? There are some other running backs I want to get to, but J.K. Dobbins against Dallas, projected for just 5% ownership at 5,800. How much interest do you have there?
Dobbins, did he make my final cut? I wrote him up. Yeah, he did, but all the way at the end. Um, yeah, he's averaged 16 carries per game over his last 4 games. He's out carried RJ Harvey 48 to 10 over the last 3. Issue is 1.0 targets per game. It's a really good matchup, really good game environment. But I just don't see a ton of upside. It's kind of just like he 100-yard bonus plus a touchdown is what you're hoping for, with not much beyond that. So I don't see him as a ceiling play. So I probably won't have too much of him, but I get it. And I think I understand why you might like him more.
I do like him more. I actually think Jose brings up a really good point here. He says they believe that HM will have a good game with the quarterback change. Last year, weeks 5 through 7, he didn't score 10 points with the same quarterback. That has been kind of like he's way better with Tua Tagovailoa historically. I kind of forgot that they have a backup quarterback this week. How much does that impact Devin HM for you? Because it like the whole team does get a little bit worse. Tua hasn't really looked that great this year in general, but like that has been kind of a negative correlation of Devin Achane with backup quarterbacks. Is that something that you might want to factor in?
Tua's out. I don't think Tua's
Isn't
out.
he?
No, I didn't think so.
I thought Tua was out. Okay. Now
Maybe this week has just been so crazy.
I know. Who's in the projections for Miami?
Yeah, good question.
Tua isn't. Never mind. Never mind. All right. I take back that whole point. For some reason I was
You
thinking
just
Tua
scared
was
me.
out this week. Yeah, apologies for scaring you. Okay. Disregard that point. I skipped over James Cook. I know I'm pretty sure you're not interested in Chase Brown. James Cook though, 6,700 against Carolina. Do you have interest there?
Yeah, I mean he kind of nukes, and I talk about Josh Allen needing to be Superman, but in the spots where they don't, uh, that's frequently James Cook nuke spots, and so that's worked out really well for us over the years, but um, usually comes in at single digit ownership where I'm really pounding the table for that. He hasn't recorded a single reception all of October, so there's a little bit of J.K. Dobbins to him as well. He's okay, not one of my favorites, but certainly in the pool up there.
You already brought up DeAndre Swift as some leverage on Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I like DeAndre. He's banged up, but hopefully healthier than he was last week. Lamar Jackson's out, so game script should be pretty good. He's looked really well since their bye week. Chicago leads all teams in yards before contact per attempt. He's hit the 100-yard bonus in both of those games. It is a very favorable matchup, a really good game environment, and so no one really wants to play him. So I like that.
Yeah. Woody Marks. We kind of saw the Woody Marks getting elite usage in that last game. Now playing a beat up San Francisco defense, 5,100. Any interest there?
No, didn't make my pool.
I saw somebody call Cam Scadaboo the meathead final boss. I think Tyler tweeted that. He scored 3 touchdowns last time he faced Philadelphia. Now he's 6,600. Any interest in Cam Scadaboo?
Yeah. So I like him. I will just say, I mean, like he faced this Eagles defense and scored 3 rushing touchdowns in that game. I know Jalen Carter was out, but still, even without that game, the Eagles are actually a bottom 12 defense by fantasy points per game to running backs. So like I don't think this matchup is as tough as people think it is. He's been balling out. Volume's good. 17.2 XFP per game over his last 3 games, 22.6 DraftKings fantasy points per game. Not my favorite play in the world, but at least relative to ownership, he's a better play than that suggests.
Any other running backs that you really like that I have not brought up?
I'd play Dowdle in a MME. Buffalo just like begs teams to run on them. That's kind of who Dave Canales offenses want to be. Dowdle leads the league in yards per carry, had those 200 yards from scrimmage games. And so like everyone's projecting him as a bad play because they're projecting a 60-40, 50-50 split. But, if he rips off a long run and Hubbard continues to suck, like who knows what it looks like. So I wouldn't get to him just because I'm a single entry, 3-entry max guy. But if I were an MME bro, I'd boost him.
I don't think I'm going to get to any of my Neil plays if the starters are in, but like I have to like mention that I'm almost tempted, like in a different week. I mean, we have Isaiah Davis against Cincinnati, RJ Harvey against Dallas, Tyler Algier against Miami. Like this should be a spot to play some backups, except we have too many good running back options.
Plays.
We have so many Neil Ass plays on this slate. But I don't know if I'm actually going to get to the Neil Ass plays. So any other running backs we want to talk about?
Yeah. Tell me who Atlanta's RB3 is again.
Oh God. Let's see. Nathan Carter, I want to say, or something. Nate Carter. Yep.
Nate Carter. All right.
Is that your guy?
I don't even know who that is.
All right.
It's very rare. I feel like it's like he went to Connecticut. Okay. Nate Carter.
Good for him. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Yeah.
All right. Wide receivers. Top of the ownership, Jamar Chase, 33% projected ownership at 8,100 against the Jets defense that, as you said, not very good this year. How much interest in Jamar Chase?
Yeah, dude, it was awesome last week. So he had the third most targets of any player in any game since targets became a stat in 1992. And it was also what kind of targets those were. Those were slants, which, Michael Thomas showed us all back in 2019 how valuable it is to be a slant boy. It's just, just free catches, free yards. It's a great way to use Jamar Chase, who's elite yak guy, elite deep threat, elite everything. He's just the best wide receiver in football. And Flacco understood the assignment. I have the best wide receiver in football. Let me just get him the ball as much as possible. This is a horrible Jets defense without their only player who can cover wide receivers. So yeah, it makes sense. Jamar Chase is chalky, but at 33%, fading him and he flops, you gain an edge on you just wipe out a third of the field. Does it make sense to play some T Higgins or play CeeDee Lamb as a pivot? I think it does. But certainly, if we're talking cash or we're just talking best plays, Chase is freaking awesome. Uh-oh. Damn
it. Yeah.
Everyone do a shot.
Yeah. Objectively strong play, like projects really well, but there are ways for it to fail. He's getting 33% ownership. Somebody in chat asking Jamar Chase or C-Mac. It would have to be C-Mac. Like the big three running backs are at the very least safer. Like I think the floor with the running backs is certainly higher than Jamar Chase. But I mean, that's an insane number, insane target volume for Jamar Chase. So tough to argue that he's not a really strong play. Devontae Smith now pops to the top with no AJ Brown, 5,900 projected for 32% ownership. How much interest do you have in Devontae Smith?
Yeah, I mean, like this is just, obviously you remove AJ Brown from the picture. We have a 3-game sample size of Devonta Smith without AJ Brown. Really, actually 2.75 games because Smith left one of those games early, but he had at least 10 targets in all of those games, averages 101 yards per game, low of 76, 20.4 Draftkings fantasy points per game. And like what's an interesting note is our film charters were telling me earlier in the week when it looked like AJ Brown was going to play that he thinks the Eagles want to feature Smith as their wide receiver 1, where he's really their guy. they're getting in the slot, they're moving around the line of scrimmage, heavy motion, and now's their chance. And yeah, I'm expecting a big game from Devonta Smith.
Yeah, I mean, 32% ownership. To me, it's like it's harder for Devonta Smith to fail than Jamar Chase because he's $2,200 cheaper and should be like getting alpha wide receiver volume here. Can still fail, but like it's a lot less likely because of the price tag. Doesn't hurt you quite as much if he does, score single digit fantasy points. Zay Flowers, I mean, I don't know if this ownership is going to hold without Lamar there.
I basically crossed him off my list, and I'm fine with that. Like, even if the ownership doesn't hold like that, he probably is going to go over owned just because of how many podcasts talked him up and whatnot.
Yep. Egbuka, how much of a slam is Egbuka with no Mike Evans this week?
I really like it. I mean, he's a must play on FanDuel, and then he's just a really good play on DraftKings. The stat I had, or the narrative I had, or the stat based narrative. So last year, Chris Godwin averaged 19.7 fantasy points per game. That ranked behind only Jamar Chase. Without Godwin on the field, Mike Evans averaged 20.7 fantasy points per game. That ranked behind only Jamar Chase. And then in games without Godwin and Evans, Cade Otton averaged 9.3 and 19.8 fantasy points per game, like a tight end who's never done anything else in his career. What does that tell you? It's just basically, dude, Baker Mayfield is freaking awesome. He's the most fun quarterback to watch. He's playing at a really, really high level. I thought even in that last game where the numbers were awful. And so, yeah, Amik Egbuka, he was fantasy's wide receiver 3 before his week 6 injury. Should be healthier this week than he was last week. So I think he's a really good play.
Last week, your call was, let's just go to Chris Olave. Why play Rashid Shaheed when you can just play Chris Olave and get all of his expected fantasy points? And it hit in a pretty big way last week for Chris Olave. Are we going back there this week? Or do you have interest in Rashid Shaheed?
Shaheed's popping as a top value. I'd only get there in double stacks with the quarterback. But I really like Olave. He's a top value for us. And I think that's rightfully so. Third of the position in XFP per game, but he's finally getting that regression we've been waiting for. If you just spot him 2 measly yards in each of his last 2 games, then he would have scored 19 and then 30 DraftKings fantasy points. I was worried about the ankle, but he's not in the injury report. Neutral at worst matchup. So I kind of want to stick with what's working here, and that's Olave way underpriced relative to his XFP with finally good efficiency these days.
And you get kind of the receivers who have elite matchups. Drake London, Cortland Sutton, mid-range, $6,400 price tag for London, $6,200 for Cortland Sutton. London projected for 15% ownership against Miami, Sutton 12% against Dallas. London, of course, now has Kirk Cousins throwing him the ball. Does that make you like him better, make you like him less? So how much interest do you have in Drake London and then also Cortland Sutton?
Yeah, I don't really know. I know Cousins targeted London a lot less than he did Mooney. And that was like the one thing he did really well last year was the deep ball. And he kind of like sucked at everything else. And maybe the mobility played a role in that. But like clearly Mooney, the deep threat. And I will say, I keep going viral for I just like love creating narratives that people then run with. And then that's all they talk about. And so the London without Mooney splits, but just as glaring are the London home road splits. This is a home game. And it is an amazing matchup. It wouldn't shock me if he gets there. But I mean, not one of my favorite plays, just the confusion surrounding the quarterback change. And, you do have Mooney there healthier than he's been all season. Cortland Sutton, amazing matchup and amazing schematic matchup. I will just say he's always been more of a high floor guy to me than a ceiling play.
Okay. Doesn't pop in the coverage matchup matrix here.
Yeah. So it's So it's an amazing on paper matchup. Dallas giving up the most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to wide receivers.
Right, right.
Last week they played man 50% of the time. If that sticks, that's a perfect matchup. And then even if it doesn't stick, then sure, it's a zone heavy matchup, but it's still the same Cowboys defense that's giving up 11.7 schedule adjusted. So it just meant like extremely low risk and high floor as it gets with Sutton. The question is just, does he have a tournament winning upside? Because we haven't really seen it as productive as he's been these past 2 years.
Yeah. In that same game, CD Lamb is 7,800 projected for 11% ownership. How much do you want to play some CD Lamb here?
I think he makes sense as a pivot off of Chase. He's just not as strong of a play as Chase. He has hit 110 receiving yards in 3 of 3 full games this year. Clearly the number one when on the field. We are projecting a partial Patrick Surtain shadow. So on his perimeter routes, he's going to draw Surtain is what we're projecting. That's what Mike Clay is projecting. How much do they move him to the slot? There's not really a lot of room for that this year. I wrote up Lamb and I felt better about it, but the more I've dug into it, I kind of think, it could just as easily be like maybe Pickens is the one with more upside. Like I mentioned the Burrow Higgins stack last year that dropped 90. A big reason why was because Chase picked up that Patrick Surtain shadow on all of his perimeter routes. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of backing off of Lamb from where I had it last night, and Pickens probably like isn't going to make my 3 max, but he's someone I've thought deeply about this morning.
Okay. Yeah, nice price tag. It's at least like there's more separation now between the Lamb price tag and the Pickens price tag. It was pretty close last week, so a little bit of separation there now. T Higgins, do we talk about that already? He's 5,600. I mean, it's been Chase getting targeted like crazy, but Higgins is also getting targeted pretty well by Joe Flacco. 5,600. How much interest do you have there?
Yeah, he makes sense to me as some sort of leverage against Jamar Chase, but I don't know. I'm probably not playing him.
Okay. I believe you said on your show last night that you're interested in Diggs. Is that correct?
Yeah, I really like Diggs.
You like Drake May. Would you play Diggs in non-May stacks, or is he just your top pass catcher in May stacks?
Absolutely. Diggs is one of my favorites this week. I actually wrote him up as a cash play, but at just 9%, one of my favorite tournament plays as well. You look over the last 4 weeks, he's ranked first, second, 63rd, and 8th among all wide receivers in target share. What happened that one game? He picked up a chest injury, also had a 50-yard catch overturned. But like if you exclude that game, certainly if you keep it, still clearly looks like a wide receiver 1, ranks 5th in target share, 13th in yards per game. His yards per route run is twice as good against man as it is against zone. Cleveland plays man at a top 6 rate, single high too. So yeah, I there's for sure variance here. Everyone kind of thinks Drake May just spreads the ball around and he's Josh Allen's little brother in that sense. And I think that could be right, but I mean, 5,800, 9%. I want to lean into that upside that's wrong. And he's the wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I like that call. No Bryce Young this week. Does that open up Tetero McMillan? Is he going to suddenly score a lot more touchdowns? What do you think of Tet this week?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's really talented, and like every ball knowing film bro will tell you, he's played so much better than his numbers suggest. It's really just Bryce Young has been awful. He's maybe even a bad stylistic fit for Bryce Young. But yeah, I really think Andy Dalton can be the cure to what ails him. This is one of my favorite stats on the week is Andy Dalton has accounted for 50% of Carolina's 300-yard passing games since Bryce Young was drafted. He started 6 games to Bryce Young's 35. So that's just crazy. And then we saw it last year. He force-fed Deontay Johnson the ball. So hopefully he does the same thing to Tet McMillan in what's like not as bad of a matchup as I think people think, or at least not as bad as years past. So but probably don't love, but I like Ted McMillan this week.
Okay. Your boy Wandale Robinson, 5,200, has been targeted pretty heavily by Jackson Dart since Malik Neighbors is out. Do you have interest there?
Not really. I mean, if he gets that volume and produces with Darius Slayton back this week, yeah, I'm gonna have to treat him like a real receiver.
Yeah. Tez Johnson, a lot of people are interested in Tez Johnson now with Mike Evans out as a wide receiver 2 here. He's 4,300. How much interest do you have there?
Yeah, mild interest. He's interesting. He's an underrated. I mean, he had clear upside coming out as a prospect 2 years ago with Bo Nix as his quarterback. That's his adopted big brother. He ranked behind only Malik Neighbors in yards per route run. So he went, round 7, but there was more upside to his profile than that projected draft capital suggested. Really good on schemed manufactured touches. He had 9 targets last week, but the one scheme target he took 22 yards to the house, forced 2 missed tackles, looked incredible on that play. So I think he's interesting. Yeah, I think he's a fine value. I think he makes sense. We talked about liking that game, liking Baker. So
yeah, I'm trying not to just go down in order, but that's kind of like I have so much interest in so many of these receivers. I want to hear your thoughts. Rome Odunze, 6,300 against Baltimore. How much interest do you have there?
Yeah, he was one of my favorites when it looked like we were going to get Lamar Jackson, but
Yeah.
he's still one of my favorites. Through the first 4 weeks of the season, he was the wide receiver 3 by fantasy points per game, wide receiver 11 by first read target share. That's really dropped off since the bye. Some of that is like Caleb's played awful. Last week, I think the weather really played a role. Caleb's ADOT plummeted, maybe due to the wind, and that's Rome works in the intermediate and deep area of the field. But he gets a top 5 matchup. He gets a perfect scheme matchup. Odunze's yards per route run doubles against man. Baltimore plays man at a top 3 rate. So, similar to Stephon Diggs, I like leaning into that upside. He's a much better play with more upside than 6,300 and 7% suggests.
Who's your preference behind Cortland Sutton? If you want to play a Denver receiver, do you like Troy Franklin? Do you like Marvin Mims? Where do you want to go, if any of these Denver secondary receivers?
I probably wouldn't play any of them as one-offs, but it would be Troy Franklin just because the XFP is so strong. He ranks really high, and he hasn't done much with it, but ranks really high in the XFP stuff. They're using him as a deep threat more, which is where he excelled in college too. He actually played with Tez Johnson at Oregon with Bo Nix, but yeah.
Yeah. A couple notes. First of all, Drake London downgraded to questionable with a hip injury.
Insane. What a freaking week.
This is the worst. This is the worst slate of all time. But I would assume Darnell Mooney looks a little bit better if Drake London is out, I think, and then maybe Kyle Pitts.
I didn't even know he was questionable.
He wasn't. He just suddenly got downgraded out of nowhere.
What is going on?
So that is something we will have to monitor. But then the other thing,
this is my least favorite week in so long.
It sucks so much. I mean, particularly like this week, like it was like already like not that great of a week, I thought, but then now it's just like, this is so gross. But then the other situation that people want to know about that I want to ask you about is we playing any Houston pass catchers with Nico Collins and Christian Kirk out. We saw Jalen Noel kind of like came, in second half last week, kind of seemed to be becoming a thing. And do we think, is Jalen Noel going to continue to be a thing? Is he going to like get more routes? He still only ran 48% of the routes last week. But again, Nico Collins now out along with Christian Kirk. Dalton Schultz I think he's actually good to go now. But is it Jaden Higgins with Nico Collins out? Is Jalen Noel, like, did he just establish himself as a really strong receiver? Or like Xavier Hutchinson, they've been trying to make a thing. Do you like any of these value receivers on the Texans?
I'd say Jalen Noel is my preference, but not super strongly, just because he's the only one who's like really produced. He caught 4 of 7 targets for 77 yards. That was 50 yards more than any other wide receiver. The projections are going to tell you to play Higgins just because he's guaranteed to run more routes. Both of like these two wide receivers, rookies drafted day 2, and they were playing behind Nico Collins, Xavier Hutchin, and Braxton Berrios last week.
Yeah,
So stupid.
I know.
So stupid. I really good coach speak. So I don't expect them to play behind Berrios again. And they didn't in the fourth quarter of that game. Coach kind of realized what was up. But
That was one of my big takes on that. It was a 2-game Monday slate last week. I thought like this is the clearest thing I've ever seen. Jalen Noel is just like the starting slot receiver on the Texans now, and he's getting 4% ownership. And the ownership actually came in at 4%. And then they just like brought Braxton Berrios from the dead, just like to run him in half the rest. It worked out actually anyway, but it was like pretty lucky that it worked out because for some reason they decided to try to revive Braxton Berrios. But in the end, they seemed to learn that Jalen Noel was the better play. So I guess that is good. Darnell Mooney, I mean, 4,400. If Drake London is out, how much of a priority do you think he is?
man, I don't know. Chris and I need to work through that.
Yeah.
But probably a pretty strong GPP play. Probably, I don't know. I got to work through it because he's a high variant guy. So like a lot hinges on ownership.
Yeah. Can you play a Titan receiver? Would that be Elikai Minor? I mean, Travarius.
I wouldn't
All right.
mess around with that.
All right. Fair enough. Any other receivers that you really want to talk about?
I want to look at Alan Lazard with Chris when we go over the projections with Josh Reynolds out. You also missed maybe my favorite GPP wide receiver play.
Oh
I feel
no!
like I've said that 3 times.
All right. Let me see if I can. Oh, is it Jalen Waddle?
Yeah, it's Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, Jalen Waddle. I meant to come back to Jalen Waddle. 5,700 projected for just 10% ownership. Atlanta's just like the defense for Atlanta has been pretty strong. That doesn't seem to matter though for Jalen Waddle with Tyreek out, just such good usage. So you say he's maybe your favorite wide receiver play?
Yeah, I mean, probably Diggs and then Waddle or Rome. It's just he was balling out with without Tyreek Hill. You had the weather game last week. No Darren Waller either. It just seems like such a guarantee that he's going to get amazing volume, even if the matchup's really tough. Even if like Tua gets benched, like what is Quinn Ewers going to do except feed Waddle a 50% target share? So yeah, I like him showing 10%. That's too low.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I don't think so.
All right. Let's move on to tight ends for National Tight End Week. As noted, you already said you can play tight ends in the flex, so it sounds like you really like the tight ends this week. Is that a narrative-based thing or just a value-based thing with the tight ends this week?
No, I see the value there for sure. Yeah, Dallas Goedert, without AJ Brown, he did have that insane 170 receiving yard game. Devonta Smith did get knocked out early, and 90 of those yards came in the fourth quarter without him. But even so, that's 80 yards. Otherwise, he did kind of not do much in the other games. But one of them was another 10 target game, so at least the volume was there. And I think like even if AJ Brown wasn't was active, I would have mentioned him as an underrated play just because he scored nearly 30 fantasy points against the same Giants defense a few weeks ago. Seen 23 targets over his last 3 games, 5 touchdowns over his last 5. So certainly a good GPP play. Certainly get him popping in the ownership here.
Yeah. So Dalton Schultz without Nico Collins was seemingly a target hog last week toward the end of the game. Project for 22% ownership at 3,300. How much do you want there?
Yeah, I get him as a value. He was the clear focal point after Nico went down. He had a big game, caught 9 of 10 targets for 98 yards. But you're showing 22%, and I really don't see him that much better than Mason Taylor at the same price, Kate Otten at the same price, and much lower ownership. So just for that reason, I'd probably just take him out of my pool.
George Kittle. George Kittle to me is like the face of National Tight End Week. Didn't get targeted last week, but he's only 4,500. I think he was in Jake's tweet of like, this is the cheapest George Kittle has been since 1907.
Yeah.
How much interest in George Kittle?
I think he's an amazing play. He's for sure my favorite GPP tight end. It's the cheapest he's been since week 4 of 2018. He's priced as just the wide receiver 34 on DraftKings. That's tied with Sterling Shepard. You can throw. I know he went catchless last week, but it seemed like he was kind of pissed about that. But you could just, ignore the narrative that we'll get to in a second. You just look at last season. He was putting up basically top 5 wide receiver numbers if you just excluded 2 bad weather games. If you look at over his career without Deebo Samuel, he's putting up like Jamar Chase numbers. I would much prefer if Brock Purdy were starting, but even with Mac Jones and it's just like 4,500 for Kittle is so stupid, and we know he has way more upside than Tyler Warren's an amazing play, but he's not sniffing Kittle's slate wrecking upside. And then there is the narrative, the National Tight Ends Day narrative. Kittle invented National Tight Ends Day. He's mic'd up every National Tight Ends Day talking about, how much he cares about it. You look last year, he had 6 catches, 128 yards and a touchdown. The year before that, 5 catches, 78 yards. Before that, 9 catches, 98 yards and a touchdown. And so, yeah, if betting were legal in my state, I would for sure have a George Kittle ladder cooked up. I for sure want George Kittle exposure in GPPs this week as well.
I didn't realize that he invented National Tight End Day, so it makes sense that he is the face of National Tight End Day in my mind. Okay. Tyler Warren, 5,500.
Yeah, I mean, he's awesome, dude. He's like this year's Brock Bowers. If you look at everything on a per route basis, their numbers are like mirroring each other. It's just, the Raiders were top 3 in dropbacks per game last year. The Colts are, bottom 7. This isn't a spot where they're going to get pushed. So I just don't see the upside really. You could play him because he's awesome, and he's probably too cheap for 5,500 in comparison to wide receivers. But it just feels like whatever he does, he's going to have to get done in the first half of that game.
Is Cade Otton still in play even with Egbuka healthy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, last 3 weeks, he's averaging 66 yards per game, had 9 targets last week. I don't think Schultz is that much better of a play, but I don't like him as much as Kittle or Mason Taylor.
Is Pitts dead with Kirk Cousins back as the quarterback? It seemed like he had a strong connection with Penix. I was totally loving Kyle Pitts this week against Miami with Penix, and now it's like he never did anything with Cousins, but is he just healthier? Can we go to Pitts this week?
I don't think you ever have to twist my arm for an excuse not to play Pitts. So yeah, let's just go with Cousins. Cousins destroys that option.
We're going back to Mason Taylor, even with Justin Fields back.
I mean, I think so. Sure, he's kind of sucked, and Fields sucks, but 65 receiving yards in 2 of his last 4 games. There's no one else to throw the ball to, like literally. Yeah. Josh Reynolds out now too. And it's just like the ultimate matchup. This is, when it's Monday in the locker room, the coach pulls the tight end on aside and is like, hey, you see who we're playing this week? That's right. We're playing the Bengals. You're going to have a monster. Get ready. You're going to get the ball a lot. And that's what's going to happen for Mason Taylor. That's what happened last week. Bengals gave up 141 yards, 4 touchdowns to Steelers tight ends, over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns to Lions tight ends, over 60 yards, 2 touchdowns to Vikings tight ends. This is the case last year. That's the case this year. They have the worst, slowest coverage safeties and linebackers in football. So really should be a Mason Taylor game unless, the coaching staff is just so stupid and Fields just can't, throw accurate balls, which granted.
Of course, he also needs to be healthy. He did hurt his quad this week, so we have to make sure he's healthy. But yeah, I'm glad that you agree because I've been in on Mason Taylor this week. Seems like last week it was like it's a good matchup. It's kind of a tight end funnel to Carolina, but like didn't feel that great about it because it's just like a good defense overall. Are they actually move the ball? This week it feels like everybody moves the ball on Cincinnati, so you'd think even the Jets should be able to. And if they can move the ball, then Mason Taylor should get some targets if he's healthy. You already gave the bull case for Mark Andrews, as Tyrod Taylor likes targeting tight ends. Are you going to play any at 3,600, 7% ownership?
Tyler Huntley, yeah, probably not.
Yeah,
I'd still rather Lamar, I think.
Okay. Colston Loveland with no Cole Kmet, is he finally going to get a shot?
I don't think so. If you look at Bears tight ends combined, they're averaging just like 4.5 fantasy points per game. Why is that? I think Caleb Williams can't work through his progressions and get to the tight end as the second or third read. So I'm not chasing it.
Okay. Any other tight ends interest you?
Yeah, maybe Kincaid. He's another questionable guy, but he ranks top 5 in yards per route run. It's a good schematic matchup. Has really been the Bills' number one when he's on the field. He's not going to get more than a 50%, 60% route share, but I don't know. He's fine.
Evan Ingram against Dallas, he's 4,100.
Yeah, probably not chasing that.
Okay. All right. Should we build some lineups?
Yeah, can we build one so I could watch the Aspinall fight?
Yeah. Let's build one lineup. Do you still want to do the all the jam them in running backs, or do you want to go a different direction?
Let's just build a Fields lineup.
Beauty. Fields with Mason Taylor.
Yeah, and we'll put Kittle in the flex for National Tight Ends Week.
Nice.
Okay. We'll get Chase in there. We can do a null bring back and then fit 2 expensive running backs if you wanted to do that. I don't know that I love it, but
we don't need to. I mean, if we prefer, I like Breece Hall. You don't seem to love him as much. If you prefer Devin Achane or Rashad White, sound like you really like.
Yeah, we could play Rashad White.
And then one of the expensive running backs. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, Bijan.
All right, then we have 5,100. Do you have a defense you like? Bears against Tyler Huntley.
Bears, and then maybe we get Swift in here instead of someone else, instead of White, maybe, and get rid of Noel.
Well, I mean, do we have a pay up wide receiver we like here?
No.
Okay.
With 600 left over, no.
Yeah. So I'm thinking like, who do we want to put in here at wide receiver?
Devonta Smith, take Noel out.
Okay, gotcha.
Or Diggs or Waddle.
Then we have 5,200.
All right, so take White out. Go to Swift. It's a Millie lineup. You want to be a little unique.
Yep.
And then do we get to
Waddle?
We get to Waddle.
Boom. That's your guy.
Yeah. I felt like I steamrolled you here. So you want to just do one more quick one?
I mean, you got to get to your fight. I thought that was the whole point. We're trying to get quick here.
Right.
No, let's get to your fight. We can get out of here. We'll be back next week. We'll make some lineups then. Scott, anything to shout out before we get out of here?
No. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for everyone who watched and listened.
All right. Thanks, Scott, as always. Thanks everybody for watching. Make sure you use OTB15 to get 15% off any product at Fantasy Points. Check it out and like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.
What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.